Hey guys, be sure if you have any questions or things you want clarified throughout these research components that you write them down and we'll talk about them first thing when we meet on Wednesday. All right, so we're going to talk about phonics knowledge and phonological blending and how that leads to independent decoding. So the first steps to fluency is independent decoding. Decoding fluency depends on recognizing words at a glance. How the brain stores words for instant retrieval was one of the most helpful parts of Kilpatrick's book, Essentials. So we're going to look at the process without the benefit of study, but hopefully it will let us think about sight word growth in a different light. The takeaway is that fluency depends on sight word recognition, and that sight words are acquired naturally if the underlying skills and processes are available to the reader. The first step to gain sight words is to be an independent decoder. In order to do that, the reader must be able to look at the word and pronounce the sounds in the word. So have that letter sound skill, the phonics, with the phonemic awareness. So if a student looks at the word shout, they can recognize that SH says sh, the OU work together to say ow, and the T represents t. Then with the phonemic awareness ability to blend sounds, the student is able to pronounce the word. This word is then placed into what researchers call the phonological long-term memory. You'll see that referred to as PLT, which includes your individual lexicon and your personal vocabulary knowledge. However, independently decoding words and getting them into that phonological long-term memory is only the first step. The question then becomes, how does this work to get stored as a unit that no longer needs to be decoded? Is it visual memory? Is it lots of repetition for memorization? No, it's a process called orthographic mapping. This was something that was very new to me as I read this book this summer. So orthographic mapping is the process readers use to store written words for immediate, effortless retrieval. It is the means by which readers turn unfamiliar written words into familiar words, instantaneously accessible sight words. Let's look at the process using the word coast. So the student has phonics knowledge and can see the sounds represented in the word. So they can see k, o, s, t. The word has been, if the student has the basic phonemic awareness skills of blending, they can pronounce the word coast. The word has been pronounced. It can be held as the phonological long-term memory. This is where we store our vocabulary words we know the meaning of, as well as words we partially know the meanings of, and even words we don't know the meaning of, but we've heard before. This area also holds bits and pieces of common sound combinations such as prefixes, suffixes, and consonant clusters. So one of the things they might be thinking when they see this word is, oh, I've heard that word before, like it could be like the beach where the water meets the sand, or it's something I do on my bike when I go down the hill. The pronounced word can now be held while advanced phonemic awareness does its job and thoroughly analyzes and maps the word. It is able to notice that the O sound is spelled OA, that the rhyme oast is like other words like toast and roast. With as few as 4 exposures, good readers now store this word as a unitized whole in the orthographic long-term memory. Here, it is never sounded out again. It is recognized instantly. It is this store of instant recognized words that defines a fluent reader. All right, so let's look at it another way. If we were going to do the word shout, we would address the phonemic awareness first. How many sounds do you hear in the word shout? Sh, ow, t. There are 3. Then we're going to build on our phonics knowledge. Can we spell those sounds? So the first sound was sh, which is represented by SH. ow, which is represented by OU or OW. There are two ways to spell ow. And then the last sound was t, which is spelled with a T. And that would be your phonics knowledge. Now, if a student knew to spell OU, spell ow with OU, then they have orthographic mapped the word. If you know how ow is the right spelling, you've created a map for that in your brain. If a student's in like 3rd or 4th grade and they are still spelling phonetically, then they have an orthographic mapping problem, which could be a phonemic awareness issue that would be needed to be addressed. Okay, wow, it's amazing. There's a lot of information out there, but there's more. So, reading systems in the brain. There are 4 parts that are used for specific functions when it comes to reading. There's the phonological processor, which is speech, sounds, and awareness. The angular gyrus, which is a sound symbol association. Hope I said that right. There's the orthographic processor, which is letter and sound pattern recognition. And then there's the Wernicke's area, which is the meaning processor, so a mental dictionary or the lexicon. They are all different parts, but they work together to make you a reader. So this is the brain of a normal reader on the left hemisphere. And so the left hemisphere for strong readers shows strong activation patterns. And on the right hemisphere, there won't be as much activity pattern on a normal, strong reader. This is the brain of a poor reader. So you can see on the left hemisphere, there is not as much activity pattern on the brain. Let's look at the right hemisphere. On the poor reader, there is a lot of activity on the brain. So think about Kyle when we talked about the gray oral reading test, and he had high IQ, but he was a poor reader. This is probably what his brain was doing. So the processes on the left hemisphere that should be working to help him decode words through phonemic awareness and phonics and stuff, those aren't strong enough and aren't working. So the other side of his brain is working because he's guessing a lot. Okay, so here are some pictures of some brains after some strong phonemic awareness activities and remediation were done with these students. So as you can see on the left hemisphere, on the student 1, there's not a lot of activity going on the left hemisphere of the brain. On student number 2, it's very scattered and not very centralized. Their right side of their brain seems to be there's more activity on those side of the brain, which we talked about how students are using other things like guessing and other skills to help them try to become a reader instead of using the ones on the left-hand side of the brain, the processor and the orthographic processor and the phonological processor, and those to help them become readers. So let's look at after the remediation. So you can see both students increased activity in the left hemisphere, and it's more centralized to one area. And what do you think we would want to see on the right side of the brain? If you said decreased activity, you would be right. Let's check. Yes, there's a decrease of activity on the right hemisphere of the brain in both students. So these studies with the brain go back to that book, Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. And so the images leave no doubt that the core problem in dyslexia is poor decoders, is phonologic. So here's the definition of dyslexia, and I feel that a lot of teachers, including myself until I read the Essentials book, maybe didn't really understand what dyslexia really was. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. So that means it's happening in the brain. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So that's what you're going to see. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological components of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So that's what's causing it. And secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And that's what it can lead to if we don't address the phonological component of language. Okay, so with the simple view of reading, that framework we were talking about, decoding times oral language comprehension equals reading comprehension. So if you have someone who is weak at decoding and they are strong in their vocabulary or oral language, they're going to be a weak reader and we're going to think could be dyslexic. This was Kyle that we were doing the oral reading great oral reading test with earlier. He had a high IQ, but he was very weak in his decoding. If you have someone who is strong at decoding, they're really good at decoding words, but the oral language comprehension vocabulary isn't there, they are also going to be a weak reader, and that's something called hyperlexia. If you have a student that is weak in decoding, and also weak on the oral language comprehension, you have a mixed. They're going to be a weak with comprehension, and they're going to need the most intense reading instruction. All right, this is Joseph Torgensen. He wrote an article called Catch Them Before They Fall, and it was all about the 5 components from the National Reading Panel, the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And so he was talking about if we have those 5 components and we're making sure that all of them are, in that reading program, then we are going to be preventing dyslexia or reading difficulties. If we don't have all 5 of those components, then we're going to be doing intervention down the road. So if you think about who is the prevention team, who is going to prevent reading difficulties and things in our school? Well, it's going to be kindergarten teachers. It's going to be first grade. It's going to be second grade, Title I teachers, SPED teachers. And then you think, who would be the remediation team? And that would be the older grades above it, because once you're past second grade, it is now a remedial thing. Okay, so back to the simple view of reading in a nutshell. Decoding, that phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, that's going to be the PTR, your pathways to reading instruction. That oral language comprehension, which was the vocabulary and comprehension, that's going to be done through Think Alouds, Reader's Workshop, things like that. And then that's going to equal text reading comprehension. They're going to have to be doing both of those pieces, pathways to reading, Reader's Workshop, or Think Alouds, to get the decoding and comprehension together to be independent readers. All right, so again, here's that simple view of reading. We've got the decoding times the oral language comprehension. So with pathways to reading, with the decoding part, there's going to be a teach and transfer cycle, and you're going to see this throughout the training. So what Pathways does is we teach consonant skills. We teach in kindergarten the early oral phonemic awareness and pre-segmenting, and we're going to teach vowel hill in kindergarten, and we're going to teach vowel town practices in first, second, and above. Then we're going to address the basic phonemic awareness, which is segmenting and blending, through a process called segment and write, and that's going to include your phonemic awareness activities and also your phonics. We do phonics guides, which are going to be like your phonics rules, like E goes at the end, or CK when there's one lonely vowel, and we'll learn those later. And then we're going to address the advanced oral phonemic awareness, and that's manipulating the sounds like we talked about earlier through an activity called Old Word, New Word. So you're going to teach these skills, and then we're going to transfer these skills. And so how they transfer those skills is through some activities called Read Words, which they're going to read one syllable and multi-syllable words, and then Read in Context, which is going to be where the students apply what they're